Hello, my name is Nicole Clancy. I'm a graduate student at Liberty University completing my Master's of Public Health with a concentration in health promotion. Today I'll be presenting an overview of my practicum experience. Next slide. I completed my practicum with the Medical Institute of Sexual Health, focusing on research in HPV, HPV-related cancers and illnesses, and the importance of the HPV vaccination. The overall goal of the practicum was to promote the importance of HPV awareness and the HPV vaccine through informational brochures to an intended audience, which I will touch on in a few more slides. So on the next slide, I have my 3 SMART objectives that I created at the beginning of the semester. Overall, my objective of the practicum was to create informational brochures regarding the HPV infection, the risks of HPV, and the HPV vaccine, and to collaborate with organizations where I would like to disseminate these brochures for their audiences. Next slide. The deliverable that I chose for my practicum project was informational brochures. I chose this deliverable as a way to reach an intended audience. In this case, it will be those in a specific age group. I created 3 brochures, and each brochure focused on one of the 3 age groups: one for adolescents, one for early adulthood, and one for late adulthood. I decided on 3 different brochures because the research on HPV is different for all of these ages. And what I mean by this is that for adolescents, I found that research focuses mainly on the vaccine available for these individuals, opposed to actual rates of HPV exposure. And for early adulthood, individuals are still able to receive the vaccine if they have not already, but there's more statistics regarding rates of HPV diagnosis for this age group. And for late adulthood, the vaccine is no longer available, and research for this age group tends to be more geared towards the effects of HPV, such as HPV related cancers, rather than vaccination research. So, because all age groups experience different phases of the HPV vaccine or the effects of HPV exposure, I decided with the help and recommendations from my field preceptor to create 3 different brochures for 3 different age groups that experience this public health concern, all in different lights. As mentioned in my objectives, I had reached out to 5 organizations where I would have liked to disseminate my final brochures based on their goals and missions as an organization. I chose organizations where I felt my brochures and the population I focused on would be beneficial to their organization's audiences. The 5 organizations that I chose to collaborate with were the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Cervical Cancer Coalition, HPV Cancers Alliance, the National HPV Vaccination Roundtable with the American Cancer Society, and HPV-ME. Next slide. So the design of the practicum was created through a descriptive research approach, basically to observe and analyze HPV as a public health concern in 3 different populations based on age. A literature review search was also used utilizing the Liberty University Library Database, the National Institutes of Health Literature Databases, and Google Scholar to research and find relevant information and statistics on HPV. Lastly, gathering data from the National Center for Health Statistics data brief allowed an understanding of the findings on rates of HPV vaccination for those in early adulthood and adolescence, and the rates of HPV-related cancers and diagnosis by age and geographic region. All these statistics and data was utilized when organizing information for the final deliverables and determining the types of organizations where collaboration could be necessary. Next slide. Recommendations for further research. HPV vaccination availability. What I mean by this is that the availability of the vaccine within the community. Through my research, I have found that many underserved communities with the lack of healthcare resources do not have direct access to the HPV vaccine, which could greatly impact the rates of HPV in these communities. While I know vaccines are expensive and maybe not readily available, I think with more research on these communities that these populations would benefit from things like the HPV vaccine clinics or HPV screening opportunities. This also goes hand in hand with HPV awareness within the community. Community engagement and community outreach is important in educating these underserved communities about HPV and the risks associated with infection, in addition to the importance of vaccination and screening for those at risk. Next, through my research, I found that there's a lack of information for individuals in late adulthood. While there is adequate research and findings in regards to HPV-related cancers for those in late adulthood, there is a lack of vaccination rates and overall statistics for HPV diagnosis for this age group. I find that this could be because those age 65 and older were unable to receive the HPV vaccine when it came out in 2006, also due to age because at the time the vaccine was created for those starting at age 9, but was later approved for those up to age 45, which was likely already out of the recommended and approved age of those 65 and older today. I also found that many individuals in this age group are likely uneducated on HPV. This could be due to the more recent approach to the infection within the last few decades. But for example, when these individuals, ages 65 and older, were in their adolescence or even early adulthood years, HPV was more unheard of and the vaccine for it was not even created yet. So maybe for future research or for someone who may choose to do research on this matter for their practicum, I recommend taking a different approach and focus on the rates of HPV and HPV related cancers for those in late adulthood rather than vaccination rates. Next slide. Through the 16 weeks of the practicum, I successfully completed research on the public health concern of HPV and HPV related cancers and illnesses. I collaborated and established partnerships with my field preceptor, Marilyn, who was a great mentor during the course of the practicum, providing me with not only support for my goals with the practicum, but with information to steer me in the right direction while completing my research. Additionally, of the 5 organizations I reached out to send my brochures to, I did only hear back from one organization so far, which was the National HPV Vaccination Roundtable with the American Cancer Society. But if I do hear back from the other organizations that I reached out to, I do still plan to send those final brochures to them, as I have them readily available. So on the next slide here, I have the 3 brochures that I created using the Canva website. The brochures for adolescents and early adulthood population focus on general information about HPV and infection awareness plus information about the vaccine, whereas the late adulthood brochure does focus on general information about HPV, but instead of vaccination information, since this group is not within the age to receive or have received the vaccine, I focus on the prevalence of the infection and screening for the infection. On all 3 brochures, you can see the general information about HPV. This reads, HPV is known to be one of the most common sexually transmitted infections worldwide. According to the CDC, 13 million Americans become infected with HPV annually, and HPV is the root cause of about 26,000 cancer cases each year in both men and women. Because of this statistic, I find that HPV promotion and education is important to increase vaccination rates while decreasing rates of HPV infection. Next slide. The outcomes of the Practicum project include reaching the intended audience where HPV can be addressed, which is completed through disseminating my brochures to the organizations that I chose. So it was important for me to collaborate with these organizations where I felt my brochures would be most impactful and beneficial to their audiences. This allows to educate the audience where they can learn about HPV and the vaccine while ultimately creating change in attitudes and their sexual behaviors. Maybe about receiving the vaccine if they have not already, but also taking proper measures to protect themselves and prevent HPV infection. Some limitations that I found through my experience include the timeline that I followed when it came to connecting with the organizations that I did. So instead of waiting until more than halfway through the semester to reach out to them, I should have researched the organizations and reached out to them earlier on in the semester. And I feel that if I did, I would have had a greater response rate from these organizations, as well as maybe reached out to more than just 5 of them. But I'm happy with at least one response. And like I said prior, even if they respond after the conclusion of the semester, I still have all 3 brochures available to send to them at any time. Another limitation that I encountered that I touched on briefly prior includes the lack of information for the late adulthood age I focused on for my 3rd brochure. So at the start of the semester, when I created my SMART objectives, I did not take into account the potential lack of vaccine information for these adults. It wasn't until I began my research where I found I was having a little bit more difficult time finding information on this age group. I think I would have taken a different approach with the third brochure if it wasn't too late, but overall, I still found out an immense amount of information on HPV related cancers and illnesses for this age group, which was able to be included in that third brochure. Overall, I find that I gained a lot of research experience throughout the duration of the practicum, as well as gained an understanding on collaboration with outside organizations and how I could approach those organizations if it's ever necessary in the future. I appreciate all that I have learned and I'm able to take on with me in my professional career in the public health field. And to conclude, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation about my practicum experience and research in HPV and HPV related cancers.